Tom Herron is a knowledgeable health advocate specializing in sleep apnea, a condition where individuals intermittently stop breathing during sleep, often for up to 2 minutes. With a deep understanding of how this disorder can affect anyone, though it's more common in males, Tom emphasizes the significant health impacts that can ensue. His insights illuminate the struggle sufferers face as they frequently need to wake up or nearly wake up to resume breathing. Through his work, Tom aims to raise awareness and advocate for better understanding and management of sleep apnea. All of this and more on today's edition of the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast. Tom Herron, thanks so much for joining me again on the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast. And something that occurred to me, Tom, was in recent times I've been hearing a lot about people who are suffering with sleep apnea and the problems that it's causing, and the whole area of problem with this machine, CPAP, I think it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong. Why do we breathe? We all need to breathe, but there are ways of breathing that can help us. I'm particularly focused on the sleep apnea, so that anyone out there who's looking and listening and wanting to, help themselves, that...
Well, sleep apnea is a particularly debilitating condition sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's, if we break it down, we're asleep and then there's apnea. And apnea is the Greek word for breath hold. So when we hold our breath while sleeping, and if you ever have seen someone that's good at snoring, should I say, and they let a big rip of a snore and then they stop breathing. And they might stop breathing for up to 2 minutes. And it can happen at any age, by the way. It's more prevalent in males. However, it does affect females as well. And it has a really debilitating effect on health. Now, in order to breathe, that person that has the apnea has to wake or almost waken each time to take a breath. Now, they mightn't be consciously aware, but it has disturbed their sleep every 2 minutes or every time they take an apnea. And you can imagine how that would affect tiredness, how it would affect your performance. And it really can be debilitating, and it can be dangerous. I live in the north of Ireland, and if someone is diagnosed with sleep apnea, they have to do a sleep study to confirm that you have got sleep apnea, which takes quite a while. And the sleep study, if it's bad enough, they have to inform they're supposed to inform the DVLA, which is the Driver's Licensing Authority in Northern Ireland, because people can fall asleep at the wheel. So you can see that it has, serious consequences. And this isn't to scare anybody that has it. It's just to make sure that the condition is treated, get someone to look at it. Now, I work with lots of people that do a lot of snoring. So basically, if we can reduce the snoring, it can have such a beneficial effect. And
Tom, do you know what causes it?
I do. And the most common form of sleep apnea is obstructive sleep apnea, OSA.
Yeah.
And it occurs when there's a functional obstruction in the mouth and throat. For example, when the tongue falls against the soft palate during sleep, and the soft palate and the uvula, the little thing at the back of the throat,
Yes,
then falls against the throat, it makes breathing more difficult. or even impossible in some cases. OSA can lead to snoring as the tongue and the soft palate, they start to vibrate and rattle. And it can also cause the person to wake up feeling as though they can't breathe. And with obstructive sleep apnea, the lungs work normally and the body still tries to breathe. But it's not possible to get enough air in through the upper airway because it's obstructed. And as I said earlier on, it's more, it becomes more common with age, and it's more prevalent in males.
And would weight contribute to
People
it,
with
Tom?
excess body weight, pregnant people, and people that sleep on their back. And some of the symptoms may include waking during sleep or feeling very tired when awake, waking from sleep feeling panicked, snoring or gasping for air during sleep, headaches, frequent headaches, awakening with a dry mouth, feeling confused or being able to concentrate at work or school. Treatment for sleep apnea traditionally requires fixing the obstruction, obviously, that blocks the airway. And sometimes that can be as simple as changing the position of sleep. Instead of sleeping on your back, you sleep on your side, or that sort of thing. And other people find that reducing weight or quitting smoking or becoming more physical in their activities can reduce the symptoms. You also mentioned, and some people do require a CPAP machine, CPAP.
Yeah.
And that's a continuous positive airway pressure machine. And that machine, it continually blows air into the throat via a mask worn over the nose or the nose and mouth and keeping the airway open. It helps a person breathe during sleep by stenting, as it were, the upper airway open with pressurized air. So there's tubes up the nose, and the pressure of the air is keeping the airway open. Obviously, when it gets more difficult, people go for surgery. And to me, that would be a last resort. And I have a son who's a surgeon, and he's of the opinion that surgery is always the last resort. And it's really useful and refreshing to see surgeons looking at that. So there's also oral appliances certain appliances that keep the airways open by preventing the tongue from falling back against the soft palate and stopping that rattle. Sometimes medications are prescribed. However, I found that in my experience that when we adjust our breathing, it can make such an impact. Now I sleep every night with using 3M micropore tape, and I tape it just across the mouth, and I never waken with a dry mouth. I sleep really well. I'm refreshed in the morning, and if I'm not refreshed in the morning, I know that my sleep has been disturbed. And I find that if I take sugar late, it'll make me snore, and I can snore through the nose.
Right.
So it's fascinating because everyone's different. And I'm just giving my own personal experience of what happens to me. But basically, when I eat late, or especially if I eat something sweet, it'll affect my nighttime sleeping.
Okay.
I have found that in my case, when I stop eating before 8 o'clock, it makes such a difference.
Right.
It makes such a difference. And the tip for people with sleep apnea can be an issue because they have to make this noise sometimes when the pressure gets too much and the tape won't allow them. So there is another product by Patrick McKeown as well, who's of Oxygen Advantage fame, called Myotape, MYOTAPE, and it's www.myotape.com. And it's a fabric that goes round the mouth without actually covering the lips. And it's sticky. And it's really useful. I use it for children, for example. And it can be really useful for allowing them to do this with the lips. However, it stops them breathing through their mouth. And it makes them obligate nasal breathers most of the time. And it still has got the built-in safety factor that if they have to do this, that they can. So I've found that being a game changer for sleep apnea.
Excellent.
And it's one of the things that we mentioned there about males. I worked with a physio in the not too distant past, and his job was looking after rugby players at international level. And basically all he did was make sure that they had a good night's sleep, because you can imagine the size of the rugby players. Some of them have got up to 21-inch necks, and someone that has a 17-inch plus neck is more prevalent to sleep apnea than someone that isn't, that hasn't got a big neck. And can you imagine someone with a 20-inch or 21-inch neck? The weight of the whole thing falling back, especially if they're on their back, and it can cause that obstruction. And that would definitely negatively affect performance at international rugby level. And it's fascinating. He makes sure that the athletes are grounded. And sometimes that requires them to having to sleep outside. And it's amazing. So if the weather's good, they sleep outside. And if the weather's bad, they use grounding sheets to help them with sleep, because of the prevalence of sleep apnea with those with large necks.
Interesting. And, we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out mostly carbon dioxide. Forgive my ignorance on the matter. Talk to us about CO2 and the importance of CO2 in our breathing, our inspiration and our expiration. If I'm doing
it's wonderful how words
correct.
are. Inspiration, isn't it? How something inspires us.
Yes.
And it gives us life.
Yes.
So it's to breathe in. And this is a topic that I talk to lots of people about because it's so misunderstood. And it's actually rather simple. The fact is we cannot breathe without CO2. And there's so little CO2 in the air, something like 0.04%. And we need about 6%. So we have to produce it. The body has to produce it. So we produce it by the process of metabolism, produces it. Even there's a reference to the production of cells, produces it. And when we do exercise, when we move muscles. So we have plenty of ways of producing it. And it's interesting to see that it's just coming to the fore now how important CO2 is. CO2 is, if you like, from a relaxation point of view, it's what keeps you calm. Now, we tend to think that if you can imagine oxygen, put oxygen on a fire and there's a rage. Put CO2 on a fire and it puts it out. So if you look at that in terms of anxiety, when we raise CO2, anxiety reduces. And it's the catalyst. CO2 is the catalyst to breathe. We have a respiratory center in the brain, and the respiratory center is constantly monitoring CO2. And once it passes over the respiratory center in the brain, it checks it for carbon dioxide content, and it then checks it against our tolerance to carbon dioxide. If we have a high tolerance to carbon dioxide, we breathe less. If we have a low tolerance, we breathe more. So, and the thing about it is, carbon dioxide is essential for breathing, and it's a mechanism called the Bohr effect, BOHR, which is it was discovered by Christian Bohr around the turn of the last century, and he found that oxygen is only released by the hemoglobin in the blood, by the red blood cells, in the presence of CO2. So if we haven't got CO2, we won't use the oxygen. We cannot use the oxygen that's already in the body. So we breathe the oxygen out. So somebody that breathes more than they need, if we got a gas analysis, there's 21% oxygen in the air. So when we breathe in, there's 21% oxygen. And when we breathe out, someone that breathes out more than they need can have an exhale of 18% of that. So we're constantly in a state of oxygen deprivation. And that's, for athletes, it's more noticeable because performance is affected. And I remember back in the day reading that tennis players like Billie Jean King, and I'm showing my age, and Martina Navratilova were nasal breathers. And they were both world number ones. So, and that's way back in the day. Now, Djokovic is a nasal breather. Federer was a nasal breather. Andy Murray is a mouth breather. And when we look at his injury profile compared to the rest of them, there's no comparison. Like Andy Murray had every shot of any of the best of them, but he was a mouth breather and he suffered dreadfully from serious injury. Now, they're definitely correlated. There's a correlation between breathing through the mouth at high performance and injury profile.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the importance of, being able to breathe correctly or correcting if you're breathing incorrectly, or is so important that to be able to breathe specifically for a sports person, maybe okay, you mentioned tennis player. What about somebody who's an athlete who is, athletes, we have to sometimes mouth breathe as opposed to nose breathe. Can you talk about mouth breathing and nose breathing for us, please?
There's a lot of debate over whether at high performance that we have to sometimes mouth breathe. Now, I'm in the position, or I'm in that school that says we can train ourselves up to nasal breathe at any sport, at any level. And I have taught CrossFitters, which is HIIT. It's really high intensity training, and they find it impossible. And they only find it impossible because they're asking themselves to do too much too early. So what we do is we train them up, we condition them. The Oxygen Advantage program isn't about forcing anything, it's about conditioning. So it's not about heroics. And it takes time. Like I've trained guys. There's one guy that has been all over Facebook, and I don't mention people that I work with usually, but it's been all over Facebook, and he mentions me all the time. And he did 60 ultra marathons in 60 days with nasal breathing. So that's pretty intense. And he said that as far as he was concerned, it saved his life because the change in his body and the change in his whole physicality was immense. So when we look at athletes, I think that it's important for the general public to realize how important nasal breathing is, because it's got such a calming effect compared to mouth breathing. And children that have their mouth open at rest, for example, tend to have crooked teeth. So if we want to save money on expensive orthodontistry, get the child to close the mouth. Babies until they're about 6 months old cannot breathe through their mouth. They're obligate nasal breathers because they're nursing or sleeping. because when they're sucking, they're breathing through the nose.
Yeah.
And it's only when they get congested that the nose gets congested and they get distressed. And then they let a squeal because they don't know what to do. And actually, there's a theory that when they do breathe through their mouth and realize that they can breathe through their mouth, it's hardwired to that distress sort of signal. So breathing through the mouth can create distress. Now, if we look at the physicality as well and look at physiology, we find that when we breathe in, we automatically go into the sympathetic nervous mode, which is fight, flight, or freeze. When we breathe out, we go into parasympathetic response. So if we can breathe and have the out breath longer than the in breath, we'll be more in parasympathetic response, which is rest, digest, and repair. And that's why things like humming is really useful.
Excellent.
Because when we hum, we actually have a longer exhale than we do inhale. And humming is really, really useful because humming produces a thing called nitric oxide in the nasal cavity. And it's a vasodilator. It opens up your blood vessels. And it's a bronchodilator. It opens up your airways. And it's a gas. And when we breathe, it's pooled in the nasal cavity. And when we breathe in the next time, after humming, it like gives a cleansing effect to the lungs. And that cleansing effect is antiviral, antifungal, and antibacterial. So you can imagine getting some sort of an infection, and they have to work out whether it's fungal, bacterial, or viral.
Yes.
And it's because I believe that if we breathe in and out through the nose and get used to it, it'll seldom, if ever, block. And there's very simple ways to start the whole process. If you watch Aidan, every time I talk for a living, just as you do. So I'm very careful of CO2 for me as a person that talks for a living. And what I do is I close my mouth between sentences and keep my sentences short. So I breathe in through the nose and then deliver through the mouth. And then the next sentence, mouth closed, breathe in through the nose and then deliver. That makes such a difference to me and to teachers and to people that talk for a living, because it's when we drop our CO2 levels too low, we will get anxious. So just something as simple as that can make such a difference to everyday life. And it's so normal to me that when I see a flight of stairs, I breathe in through the nose, and I'm talking about just fill in my nose. Small breath in, small breath out, hold my breath and walk up the stairs without breathing. And then if there's another flight, I'll recover breathing in and out through the nose on that flight. If there's a third flight, I'll do breath hold at the bottom and hold it to the top. And we always hold the breath after exhaling. And that means that I don't have to do a load of exercise, breath work wise, because my whole day is full of it. I hum in the car. I pick when I'm driving. Lots of people have got big issues with ruminating thoughts and beating themselves up.
Yeah.
And to get out of our head, it's so easy to use the breath. So when I'm driving along, I pick a landmark in front of me, like a tree or a bridge or a lamppost or whatever, a road sign, just ahead of me. And I'll breathe in, small breath in through the nose, small breath out, hold my breath until I get to it. And it makes such a difference to me because I haven't thought about anything else that whole journey except when's the next breath.
So that's the optimal way to breathe, Tom. Yeah?
Yes, most of us breathe more than we need. And it can be much more destructive physiologically than eating more than you need. And that's what I find. And there's lots of information coming out about breath and breathing and breath work now. It's massive. And
Yeah.
I found it really useful because my sport was judo and I was gassing out so easily. And through breath work, I got my black belt in my 51st year, you know, and thought I was well past it then. However,
Yeah.
wonderful things can
Can
happen.
happen.
And
Yeah.
it gives you a zen state in the sense more often because it's always a balance between fight or flight and rest and digest. And we need to sleep and have good rest in order to repair. And nasal breathing can be so quiet and so calm and I believe that it's the step before mindfulness, um, Aidan, because I believe that there's so many people out there that's too anxious to be mindful. They're just too anxious.
So changing your breathing, Tom, can have a really positive, beneficial effect on your health. So you're moving from, as you talked about, the sympathetic into the parasympathetic, uh, from
Yes.
from anxiety to rest and digest. That's really important. I think there was a message that we got across to our listeners and to our viewers. That you have within you the capacity to be in control, and simply by changing the way you breathe. And you know something that I picked up on, Tom, the significance. We talked about oxygen, carbon dioxide.
Hmm.
It's carbon dioxide that initiates or causes the inspiration. Is that correct?
It's the catalyst to breathe, yes.
Yeah.
So it's it's that important.
Yeah.
And it's also the it's the trigger for the parasympathetic response because it stimulates the vagus nerve. So it stimulates the vagus nerve. Now we get a if we do reduce our breathing, it takes a bit of practice because whatever we practice, we get better at. If we
Mm.
practice over breathing, that becomes the norm. If we practice breathing less, that becomes the norm. And it's so easy to get I'm not getting enough breath here.
Mm.
Like this whole concept is based on the work of Professor Buteyko,
Mm.
who was a Ukrainian doctor who wanted to get something for his own hypertension as a young doctor. In his mid 20s, he had hypertension, he had high blood pressure, and he hadn't access to Western medicine because of the Cold War. So he had to play about with things. So he started to reduce his breathing for some reason, and he found out that it reduced his blood pressure. So he went into the hospice where he was working for terminally ill patients, and he started to talk to the nurse about the breathing patterns could dictate how long the person would live. And the nurse was surprised, to say the least, but she was interested enough to note what he was saying. And he was right every single time he told them how long they would live. And they said, well, is there something we can do? So they intervened and reduced their breathing. And many of them walked out of the hospice. And
Mm.
he finished up on the Russian space program. And he worked with thousands of people. And he had
Yeah.
big budgets and he worked with thousands of people. And he found out that not only did reducing the breathing reduce blood pressure, it also reduced blood sugar.
Mm.
So you can see how it regulates. You can imagine that if something is a vasodilator, if CO2 is a vasodilator, obviously blood's going to flow through your arteries and veins much easier.
What would you say, Tom, about how breathing would affect our cognitive functioning? What would you say about that?
When I'm working with people, I find that they need to get out of their heads because their heads tend not to be a nice place to be in. When I work with trauma, Trauma is when the world as we know it has been changed without our consent, if you like. So that covers things like, if we substitute the word trauma for shock. So what shocks me may not shock someone else.
Right.
So it's totally subjective and unique to the person in many ways. So, and that shock could be falling out with someone that's had been a very good friend. And it's shocking because you can't get that person back to where you had them before this incident happened.
Yeah.
And the relationship changes. So the
Yeah.
relationship changes and it's shocking. And then we can go into PTSD, and which is the world's changed there without your consent. And it's amazing how we can self-regulate using something as seemingly simple as breathing, because it's all about self-regulating. It doesn't matter what happens as long as you can self-regulate. And it's the
Being
absence
control.
of it's the absence
Yeah.
of soothing very often is worse than the actual event in trauma.
Mm.
So when we can soothe ourselves, it's like, look at the animals. It's amazing what they do, and they self-soothe.
Yeah. 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 Are there any myths about, I had a question here. Are there any myths about breathing that you'd like to debunk?
I do. That we mix up big breathing with deep breathing. If I say to you, take a deep breath, we take a big breath.
Mm.
So most of the time, for the vast majority of time, big breathing is unnecessary. And we can take a small amount of air. And if we put our hands on our chest and our hands on our tummy and breathe in and move the tummy, you'll see how deep that can go.
Mhm.
And actually, I put my hands on my sides and I push in just below the rib cage. And we have got spare ribs that are unattached. And basically, when I push in, and I push in pretty firmly, and I breathe in, and I feel the air pushing the sides out. That's the way I like to breathe, because that supports my back.
Mm.
So I just was reading a paper yesterday, and it's about breath work to save back pain. And it's fascinating because if we breathe chest, the back's not supported. When we breathe low, it is. So it's fascinating. And things like, you know, when we talk about core strength. The largest muscle in the core is the diaphragm. Nobody trains it. Nobody mentions it. So why do we not mention the largest muscle in that area? And when we look at the esophagus and we look at things like hiatus hernias, and the esophagus has to go through the diaphragm to connect with the stomach, and there can be the sleeve there can get leaked or damaged, and it causes all sorts of things. But nobody mentions the diaphragm.
Tom, could I ask you to, if possible, it may not be possible, but if it was possible for you to, demonstrate for us breathing at at a restful state.
Some of the things that we have to realize is if we hear our breathing, we're breathing too much.
Okay.
If we see it, we're breathing too much at rest.
Okay.
So we teach it that we can't see it and can't hear it. So
Now, when you say see it, what do you mean? Is that in a
you can't see
frosty
it, you can't
morning?
see anything moving.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Right.
So,
Okay.
because when you're sitting and you look at someone and you see their breath and you know what state they're in, you can calculate what state they're in. And if you've got an issue with cold hands or cold feet, there's a circulation issue, and it's
Yeah.
probably to do with breathing, or could well do with breathing more than you need.
Right.
So if we start to, and it's simple, we always breathe in, or usually are breathing through one nostril better than the other. And sometimes when we go and block the nostril we're breathing best through, we can feel the air hunger. We can feel this need for air. And basically, it's useful to practice that and let go anytime it gets too difficult. This isn't about heroics. It's about training the mind, body, spirit to get more used to higher tolerance of CO2. And just move that. And we can do that for 2 minutes. We can do it for the rest of our lives.
Okay.
So, and it's building that up. And I get people to do it and see if they can do it for 10 minutes. And even if they're starting and stopping, it's just 10 minutes. And I remember having this lady who, serious COPD. She had several really serious respiratory issues. And she was wondering, I can't sleep, she couldn't. And she was very determined. She used to crawl up the stairs into the bedroom. She says, if I get a lift, I'll never be able to walk again. And she said that if I bring my bed downstairs, I'll never get up the stairs again.
Yeah.
And I says to her, well, what would you like to do? She says, can you help me? And I says, well, we'll have a go, but it'll take time. So to cut a long story short, we did it, and I worked with her, and I says, I'd like you to do this for 10 minutes an hour for 5 hours a day. It sounded crazy. And all it was take a small breath in, small breath out, hold the breath, hold the nose for a count of 5 and recover. And do that for 10 minutes every hour for 5 hours and see how you get on. And I'd like you to tape your mouth at night. And I asked her to tape her mouth not horizontally, but vertically. So that when myotape wasn't about at the time. So basically, if and she turned the ends of the tape onto itself so that only the middle was sticky, so she could pull it off at any stage. And we were monitoring this, and she wasn't very impressed for the first week. She wasn't very impressed for the second week. Third week, she was getting phlegm up, and she was amazed that she could get phlegm up. And then, so as we went through week after week, about week 6, she says, I can't believe that I can bring this phlegm up so easily. And she could. And she says to me, I'm doing 10 minutes on a bike. And she says, I'm walking up the stairs.
Marvelous. And as you mentioned, Tom, fascinating. Indeed, it is fascinating.
And it's not everybody would do what she did. She was so determined. She was so determined. And it was fascinating to see the rewards that she got.
Yeah.
From something as simple as breathing. Yeah. And I remember a guy rang me up one day and he says to me, I've got a friend in hospital, he says, and he's got a serious respiratory issue. And he said, the doctors can't do an awful lot for him at the minute. He says, I don't even know what the issue is. He says, but would you go down and see him? And I says, oh, well, surely. And the guy says to me, look, I know that I have got a limited time to live, he says. The doctors tell me that it's rather shorter than I would like. Is there anything you can do? And he says, I don't know. He says, well, will you have a go? So we did. So he was given something like 3 months to live. And the guy that actually rang me 2 years later died. And this guy was still living.
Oh.
And he actually come out of the hospital with me. He says these guys can't do anything for me, and that's just a story that it's just amazing what breathing can do. The American Indians, anthropology tells us that they believe that we have got X number of breaths, and then we die. So it's useful to slow that up.
Fascinating, Tom. It's a topic that we could go on talking about
We
for
sure could.
hours and hours because there's so much in it. And for anyone watching and listening, how can we contact you?
I have a website. It's www.tomherron.experience.com.
Right.
And my phone number in Southern Ireland or in the Republic of Ireland is 08680500604. In Northern Ireland, it's 07734345163.
Give
And
us
anyone
those
that wants
numbers
to
again, Tom.
have a chat about any of the things, feel free to do so. If
Yeah.
text me a message or something like that, because it is fascinating, and you'll realize how something as simply as that's so simple. One of the things that I find fascinating about
Mm.
breath work is anybody that's of a spiritual nature, because breathing is very spiritual,
Mm.
and you'll find that meditation is breath work. Yoga for thousands of years was breath work only. The exercises came later. So all of that stuff is very relevant. And one of the things that really got me was when I breathe in, I must breathe in to survive. It's mandatory that I breathe in, and that breath from the universe gives me life. But in order to survive, I must breathe it out. So to take the next breath. So it's a really wonderful metaphor for forgiveness that we have to let go of everything to survive. And
Wonderful. Yeah. That's a wonderful way to, to phrase it and to look upon it, that you're getting rid of the waste gas, and you're forgiving, yeah, and
you're
you're
forgiving.
in something new.
So it's a wonderful metaphor for forgiveness. And if we look at
Yeah.
the word forgiveness, it's forgiving away.
Yeah.
Forgiving.
Yeah. Wonderful. Tom, just give us your numbers again, please, if you don't mind.
So the number is in the Republic of Ireland is 08680500604. And in Northern Ireland, it's 07734345163. And the website is www.tomherron.experience.com.
Excellent. Well, I mean, as I said, we could go on talk for hours, but we have to end now. And, I encourage anyone who needs to know more about this to contact the man himself. So, Tom Herron, thank you so much for this wonderful experience of speaking with you today. Bye bye
Thank
for
you
now.
for
Until the next time.
Thank you for the opportunity, and anything that you have, anything I can help you with, feel free to lift the phone.
Thank you, Tom. Take care. Bye for now.
God bless.
You have been listening to the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast, a production of the European Association of Professional Hypnotherapists, and that's eaph.ie. And I have been your host, Aidan Noon. That's all for now. Until next time, thanks for watching and listening. Bye bye for now.